Um, Tonight our topic is life lessons and how to learn them, which seems like a pretty darn useful topic. Because we're just us, we can do this very informally. I know some of you are going to have a crimp in your neck by the time the night is over, so if you want to shift your chairs a little, feel comfortable. I think we'll start, though, with a little bit of chanting, just to put us in order. This is my friend Raghu. He has lived in Dallas years ago, and now he's come back to stay for a while. So it's just it was a coincidence that we're both here at the same time. I'm visiting. He's resident now. It's very nice to see you all. Some of you are new faces, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Oh, that's a nifty thing. My name is Asha, and I'm visiting here just for the weekend. I live in Palo Alto, California, although I'm trying to become a citizen of the world. I've been living in Palo Alto for some 25 years, but Swami Kriyananda just a year ago suggested that I should travel more and try to consider the whole world my community. It's sort of been a joke, because ever since he asked me to travel more, I felt more like a homebody than I've ever felt in my life. So they've been trying to get me to come back to Dallas for 2 years, and I just have said no every time. But I think finally I'm popping out of the cork a little bit and ready to be here. I've been following the path of self-realization. I really started when I was 18, which was quite a while ago. And about 5 years after I was first introduced to self-realization, I was fortunate to meet Swami Kriyananda. Swami Kriyananda just passed away last April at the age of 86, so there was a lot of years. He was a direct disciple, as most of you know, of Paramhansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. Yogananda was from India, Kriyananda was American. And Yogananda died in 1952, and Kriyananda, when he was a very young man of 22, met Yogananda. In the last 3.5 years of Yogananda's life, he had direct training. He came late in Yogananda's life because his responsibility was going to be to build, to take the message afterwards. It very often happens, in fact, it virtually always happens in the life of a great teacher, that there's also a significant disciple. And that disciple is generally younger, almost by a generation. And then that disciple gives form to the energy that the master brought forward. Things happen on many different levels. And the master brings the essential vibration, but to manifest and make practical that vibration, rarely, in fact, never really that I know of, does the master himself do it. Yogananda did more than most. He wrote a few books, there were recordings coming in, he established an organization. He did more than most, but what he did still was just, the thinnest line of what the potential of what he brought is. His Autobiography of a Yogi is still, it's like the textbook. It's like anybody in any tradition who moves a little off-center from, just the mainstream understanding of spirituality. In almost any company that you're in, almost everyone will have read that book, no matter where they've ended up. It's somehow that's just his job. I live in Palo Alto, the home of Apple Computer, so Steve Jobs and his whole life mission, of course, has been a huge issue there. It's a local event. It's more than just a global event for us. It's also local news. And after his passing, I just recently learned that at his funeral, he arranged for everyone who came to his funeral to receive a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi. Wow. Yeah, and I just learned that recently. That's how I understood it. And he had one book on his own iPod, and it was Autobiography of a Yogi. He lived 2 miles from our temple, and he never set foot inside our temple, although we know that he knew about it through various connections. So he never in any way formally associated himself with Yogananda or his organization. He was not associated with SRF either. But in many ways, he was one of the most influential, technical people. He changed the face of the globe, literally. And he had this very strong, every year he read Autobiography of a Yogi. He read it once a year, every year, for 30 or 40 years. Because a master doesn't come to get everybody to be his followers. He comes to awaken us to our own reality. The teachings of Jesus are a textbook example. Yogananda made a distinction between true Christianity and what he called churchianity, which was just how people took it, and then made it into a religion when it just, at the beginning, was a revelation, and then it became a religion. And religions are not bad. They help a lot of people as a rule, and then they do a certain amount of damage. And in the Indian tradition, then, so every so often, a new master comes on the scene, because he has to revitalize it and take it back to its original source. And that's what Yogananda's mission was. He was to teach original Christianity and to show that the original teachings of Krishna and the original teachings of Jesus are the same. Because we're at a point in our planetary evolution where it's time for unity. And so that which has appeared to be separate, East and West, we're now beginning to understand is just the same. Again, I live in Silicon Valley. It's very interesting. There is no dominant ethnic cultural group in the area where I live. It's in thirds, the population. 1/3 are Latino, Spanish-speaking as the first language. 1/3 is Asian, and that's a broad sweep. China, Vietnam, in many, many people from India. 1/3 is Asian, and then 1/3 is the rest, which doesn't just include people who are native-born Americans. That's all the Russians, of which there is a huge contingent, just all the rest. Literally, I mean, of course, the coast of America, especially California, is a place where a lot of things start. And I know that there's lots of places in Texas now where everything is also becoming, there's no center of influence, it's shifting. But it's fascinating where I live, because literally you just hear all languages. And you just walk around in restaurants or social events or cultural events, and you just move around, and you hear a lot of English, but by no means entirely. It's just like, it's just globalization, that's all. And with that, of course, it's very, very hard to hold these rigid lines. My way of doing it is right. My language is the right language. My religion is the right religion. After a while, you sound a little silly in the face of, even just in the face of science. What to speak of common sense. My husband and I just took a brief holiday to Mexico just to be on the beach and be in the sun. And gosh, Mexicans are just like us, you know. I'm not being fatuous, but it's just so obvious. It's just like everybody's exactly the same. I've been traveling to India regularly, and I've been going through Dubai because it's a good connection from California. It's a good price and it's a good connection. And first time I went through Dubai, I mean, there were all these women in burqas, which, you know, you've heard about burqas, but there you were, and there were just lots of women in burqas. Some even actually had their faces covered. Some had their faces like this, but most of them, you saw their whole face. And you could just see, peeking out of the burqa, was just the same person that you could have known from anywhere. The women were thinking about their children and what they were going to fix for dinner, and sometimes the beautiful clothes they were wearing under their burqas, you know. Some of those women, Asian women sometimes think that Western women are just so clunky. When we used to visit India on pilgrimage, and we used to stay in very nice hotels, and we were on pilgrimage, we were going out, and we were dressed in our whites a lot of the time, very plain, often very grungy after being out all day, and we'd get in the elevators, and to my taste, you know, beautiful Indian women are the most beautiful women in the world, and the clothes, and, you know, we would feel like something that the cat just found and just dragged in and dropped in the corner of the elevator, and we'd sort of we'd feel this almost overwhelming compulsion to explain that I don't always look this bad. But I have to say, there's just an elegance in some of those women in the burqas, and I'm kind of sensitive to clothes and costumes and things. It's always been a hobby of mine, and I would observe fine fabrics, beautiful detailing on these, you know, these things that are supposed to be worn But in the West, we think of them as such a curse. And this woman in her burqa would be more beautifully elegant, than I have ever been at my best moments. And you would think, oh, if only I could wear one of those, classy black robes. But what you're really feeling is that consciousness is the same everywhere. And that the differences are so small compared to what pulls us together. And what really pulls us together is this journey of life that we're all on. We just find ourselves, we literally, and that's literally what it is, we find ourselves here, don't we? It just, at some point, little babies just find themselves in their bodies. And when we understand karma and reincarnation and the astral world and how the soul gets drawn into the body and, takes on this body. This little girl was born into our community. And she, for the first 2 years of her life, she looked like this slightly annoyed, imperious old woman. She had the farthest thing from a child's face or a child's manner. She was just there all the time. And you could sort of see in her expression, like, where are the servants? Why are things so untidy around here? And just completely, that was her attitude. And I joked with her parents, by the time she was 3 or 4, she didn't look quite like that. And I said, she always had that look, I said that exactly, like an imperious old woman looking for her servants. And then her parents started, I said, and then she seemed to stop looking that way. And then her parents said, that's because she found her servants, her mother and me, which was exactly the truth. And then you could literally see that she caught up to the fact that she was a child. And that somehow she began to be a child. Because for those first couple of years, you could see she was just confused. Whatever force she had died with, and you can imagine, some older person with a lot of power. She really looked like a wealthy widow who'd had her way for a really long time, and she just was still there. And even though she was in this baby's body, it was just annoying, rather. She just couldn't relate to what was really happening. And then finally, oh, she got it. Oh, I'm a kid. Oh, so I'll just be a kid. And she started being a kid like that. Because I believe wholeheartedly in reincarnation, which we can discuss, which is essential to this conversation. We can discuss it in more detail if we need to, but I feel that after all the years that I've been graced to be able to be on the spiritual path and the serious effort that I've made to make myself into a better person, and I don't feel it's all been futile. I think in many ways I can claim by no means final victory, but I think this life has not been without a little bit of progress. But many of the ways that I feel now, I recognize are the fact that I'm not 25 anymore. And personally, I love growing older. Every year has been better than the years before. It was lots of fun being young. And as one of my friends said to a crowd of young people, enjoy those beautiful young bodies while they're still working so well. Because you don't realize how quickly they're just not going to function quite as smoothly as they function right now. And so all of that, there's a positive to be said about that, but there's no substitute, I feel, for the relaxation of experience. But sometimes I become anxious that a certain amount of freedom that I have is just because I'm old, and when I'm 22 again and 25 again, the same well-meaning stupidity will just invade my brain again. So I often imagine myself, literally I do this, I imagine my next body, and this is my goal. I want them to say about me, I always think of myself as remaining a female, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I want them to say, she was never a child, she was born an old woman. To me, that would be just like high praise. That's what I want. I want to be born an old woman. I want to know from the start where I want to be where I am now, with that comfort that age brings that youth doesn't have. Youth has other benefits, but it doesn't have that comfort in yourself. Now, what I'm talking about here, altogether with all of these ideas, is just this flow, this continuous flow of reality and this journey that we're on. There's essentially 2 ways to look at this. Either we are engaged in a random series of events that just goes nowhere, has no ending point, has no beginning and no end, just appears for a while, and then we fall off the map, and that's the end of the story. Or we're engaged in something that has a higher purpose and a deeper meaning. I personally just simply couldn't take the random theory, and from a very young age I was quite convinced that there was something else going on here. I actually thought for a long time as a child that all the adults knew it, and it was just a question of my reaching a certain stage in which we would all have a good laugh, and they would tell me what the point was, and then we would go on from there. And it was with increasing anxiety that I realized that they were not keeping a secret from me. They didn't know. That was very, very distressing. And it started coming to a real head in junior high and then in high school. What actually happened in the 5th grade, my teacher's name, her name was Mrs. Pugh. Can you imagine somebody with the name Pugh having the courage to be an elementary school teacher? But yeah, you would change your name. I mean, you can imagine what happened behind that Pugh woman's back. But she stood up and she was telling us, she was explaining to us why there was no life on any other planet. I mean, this was science when I was in the 5th grade. There was no life on any other planet because, and she described, which I have blissfully blotted out, the 3 conditions that were required for life, and that there was no other planet anywhere that had those conditions, and therefore there was no life on any planet but Earth. I was in El Paso, Texas, I want to say at that time too. And I said, couldn't there be a life form that thrived in other conditions? I mean, like, how obvious is that question? She said, no. And that was the end of it. She said, no. At which point I realized these people don't know anything. How do they get to be school teachers? How can they be responsible for my future? And so I didn't flip out. I was too small to flip out, but I became very, very suspicious. And I was waiting to grow up. I was really just waiting to grow up. So I got old enough to go to college. By then we were in California, and I was accepted at Stanford University. I didn't really have any particular desire to go anywhere. I didn't know what to do with myself, but it was a prestigious thing to have been accepted. So in those days you could talk yourself into things. I mean, you were personal interviews, and of course I just talked myself. I was always good with my mouth. So I got in on the basis of my personal interview. But I thought they would be wise. I didn't have the actual vocabulary for that because it was such a, prestigious school. They were intelligent, and they actually probably had more to teach me than I knew. But it became obvious literally within the first 7 days that they were not wise, the people who were teaching me again. Once again, I'm with people who actually don't know. They're all just guessing. They were just guessing just like me. And I finished the year, but I, in the end, flunked out. I made A's and F's. I'd go to class. I was perfectly competent to do what they were asking me, but I couldn't see any point in doing it. And I never, parents keep me away from their children when their children are wanting to drop out of school because I'm not the person to talk to. I never went back or looked back or regretted it at all. I just found another life. It wasn't my destiny. But they were guessing. And it seemed so fundamental to me that the first thing you had to figure out is what you were doing here. Otherwise, what was all the rest of it about? They promised me obliquely that if I did this or did that or got money or got this education or this position, and I didn't have any lack of confidence. I knew perfectly well I could have done any of it. But I saw the end of the road, and I just didn't know why I would want to be there. Because I couldn't just see how it fit together. And so that when I met Swami Kriyananda, which I met him when I was 22, when I was 18, I was given books about self-realization. And it was like when I first read my first book, even just the first pages of it, it was just that feeling, this is it. And it was like, it was, there's somebody somewhere in the world who knows what we're doing here. And what it said to me was so simple. It so simply said, the nature of reality is bliss. The purpose of life is to experience bliss. And even more importantly, this is how you do it. And it gave me just 3 little rules. It was, today is the result of yesterday, and tomorrow is the result of today. The law of karma. It was presented as the law of karma, but that's how I remembered it. The second was, the more you think of yourself, think about yourself and how you feel, the more unhappy you'll be. The more self-forgetful you are, especially self-forgetful in the service of others, the happier you'll be. That was like such a novel thought to me. Not think about myself all the time? What else is there to think about? It was just complete, wow, what a concept. Because I had been just walking around all those 18 years, just asking the question, what about me? What about me? What about me? What about me? Because nobody seemed to be able to solve it for me, so all I thought about was me. I was, if you'd looked at me, I wasn't narcissistic, I was generous and I was happy, but underneath it was this constant self-preoccupation, just constant. It was just a shocker to me to imagine. I had to literally train myself to take my mind off myself. I would recite what I was seeing, I would make a little, a japa, now I know it's called that, where you have a repeat of prayer, but I didn't know how to pray. So I would just describe to myself what I was looking at, just to get my mind off the thought of myself. And the third principle was from the Bible, perfect love casts out all fear. Selfishness, fear, lack of bliss. Those were the realities that plagued me, and self-realization promised me that I could solve them. And I was just hooked. But it still wasn't practical, and I spent 5 years reading. Just reading, and talking to my friends. I was with a small group of people. This was 1967, 68, when all this was breaking in America, and breaking open. And we talked and talked and talked and talked. But still, I got up every morning, and I was pretty much exactly the same. And that was real freaky to me, because I had the feeling that I never ever thought of this as religion. It just never crossed my mind that this was religion. To me, this was life. But I could not figure out how to make it life, because I was still pretty much just functioning on the same level. And I don't even mean that I needed to stop what I was doing. I just couldn't figure out how to integrate it. And that's when Swami Kriyananda came in the room, literally. He came in the room, and I looked at him. I was saying this to many of you this morning, so I won't repeat it in detail. But I just looked at him, and I thought, oh, my gosh, he's done it. And I just could feel it. I could feel that he was living a different life. Of course, he was living a different life. He was a Swami, he was in America, he was building the Ananda communities. But that wasn't what got me. I didn't even know that when I first saw him. All that I saw is that he was vibrating a different reality. And the reality he was vibrating was just the reality I wanted. It had no boundaries. And it was very, very joyful. It was just joyful like that. And over the course of the decades, I understood why. I understood that he understood why we were born, what we're supposed to be learning here, and he was really industriously learning it. And then in the process of that, helping a whole lot of other people by writing, by example, by all those different things. And so here we all are. And I was thinking when we were meditating just before we started, there's a book by a Viennese psychiatrist. He's passed away now. His name is Viktor Frankl. Maybe many of you know that. His book is called A Search for Meaning. It's a magnificent book. And his story is very dramatic. As a very young man, a very promising psychiatrist in Austria, probably Vienna, he was a Jew. The Nazis took over his country. He and his wife, he was married, he had a beautiful young wife, and their family, his family, they were all wound up and sent to concentration camps. And everyone in both their families, except for one of his sisters, were all died. He didn't know that, of course, until it was over. And he writes, in that book, he writes the story of the years that he spent in the concentration camp, and it's beautifully written, and it's a horrific tale. We've all read enough about that or heard enough to know what a horrific story it is. He describes it, and he has some very interesting elements in the way he describes it. I think he was comfortable and lived well, but his real attachment in his life was to his intellectual work. And he was in the midst of writing a book or a dissertation or something like that. And when he was captured and taken, his prized possession was his manuscript. Some people were holding their jewels or whatever they were holding. He had his manuscript. He had it hidden somewhere in his clothes. And he's 24 years old. He's just a young man. And somewhere in the course of that, somebody ripped that away and just threw it on the garbage heap. And when that was ripped away from him, he realized that everything was gone now. Not the woman he loved, his family, his reputation, and all of his life's labor, just thrown away just like that. And because of his training and because of his karma, because of who he was, from then on, it became, he both experienced it and observed it simultaneously. He observed himself and he observed the people around him. What is left when there's nothing left? And when he wrote his book, he only hinted at even the idea of God or spirituality, but you can tell that there was also an expanded awareness motivating him, whatever he called it. It was always there because what he discovered in the concentration camps, which was so startling, was that when you have nothing, you always have, he never used these words, but you always have your own consciousness. And he said you always have the choice of your own personal dignity, if you want to call it that, which is the word he sometimes used, which is how you are within yourself when you have nothing but yourself. And of course, the experience could not have been more dramatic. How fortunately rare it is for anyone to be thrust into such a situation. And in his case, it was everything to him. We would normally think of that as terrible karma, to use those words. What terrible karma. But it wasn't terrible karma if you used it to enrich and to ennoble and to deepen your sense of reality and the power of yourself. Now, Swami Kriyananda once, when he was teaching about the law of karma, I don't know what motivated him to do it, but I presume it was a divine inspiration into a room of, it was almost 1,000 people, when he was teaching super conscious living at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. He said, and these were his exact words, the Jews deserved what happened to them. The room exploded. Just in outrage. And he just did it. He was not that kind of teacher. But on that day, for some reason, he just said it like that. And then after, the calm down, he said deserved also means, it can also just as easily mean it was a reward. Well, there's nobody who deserved the promotion any more than he did. If anybody deserved to be honored, it was him. It was our assumption that challenging circumstances are a punishment. And what Swamiji was saying was that it was a karmic opportunity. And I actually read a treatise by a rabbi. I was part of a Jewish-Christian dialogue. And we were reading, it was the Jews' turn. I'm Jewish, I should say that. My family was Jewish. I always have to make that caveat when I start talking about the Jews. So I grew up with all of this. This one rabbi wrote that those days were the shining hour for the Jewish people, because absolutely everything was taken away from us and we had the opportunity to prove of what we are made. And that's how Viktor Frankl took it, both as an interest and also as a survival method for himself. And when eventually, as all things are, it proved to be temporary, and they were released and the war was over and he went on with his life, he made a psychiatric practice out of the revelation that he came to in the concentration camps, which is you can endure anything if you can find meaning in the experience. And that's why he called his book The Search for Meaning, and his therapy, which became a whole movement, was logotherapy, which is the search for the meaning behind it. He was the founder of that. The story he tells in his book, which I'll try to tell without choking up, because I almost always do, he gives this example of an elderly man who had had a wonderful marriage for 60 years, and his wife died. And after his wife died, he went into a state of grief from which he could not emerge. And his friends, out of concern for him, finally persuaded him to come and see Dr. Frankl as a psychiatrist. So the man sits down in front of Dr. Frankl, and they start a conversation, and he starts asking him about his wife, that being the issue. Were you very close together? Yes. Did you do everything together? Yes. Was she, did you take care of her? Was she dependent on you? Oh, yes. What would it have been like for her if you had died first? Oh, he said, it would have been unbearable for her. And then Dr. Frankl said, well, he said, you spared her that suffering, didn't you? At which point the man went completely silent. He stood up, he held his hand out, he shook Dr. Frankl's hand, and he walked out of the office, and he never came back. We can endure anything if we can understand why it's happening to us. The search for meaning. And that's what life is really all about. We think that life is the search for pleasure, or for ease, or for comfort, or for power. Not really. It's the search for meaning. Because if there's meaning to it, it doesn't matter. We can go through it. Now, ideally, in that particular circumstance, he was able to talk about this human relationship and this man's selfless love for his wife and his perfect willingness to be the one who had to live without the other. Much better him than her, because his heart was really pure in relation to her. Just he hadn't thought of it that way. Now, for us as individuals, as souls on a very long journey, no one can persuade you that you are more than your physical body, more than your ego. But you can persuade yourself by some intuitive knowing. And we can give you, logical explanations, and they're brilliant writings trying to explain it to you. But at some point, it's something that we just sense within ourselves. Age has a little bit to do with it. We look at our baby pictures, we look at ourselves now, we remember ourselves at a certain age, we feel this underlying, continuing reality that seems to be independent of all the changes that are happening. It's at a certain point, our own inner impelling desire to know, and that's part of what convinces us that we are more than we appear to be, is there is this just compelling desire to understand, and that every so often something will break. It can come when a baby is born. If you're a parent and the first time your child is there, and just the stunning power of that moment, it's like the veil becomes thin in such a moment. Or if you meet your true love and you recognize each other, and the veil becomes thin, and you just know what's happening here. Maybe you're out in nature. I've done very little hiking and backpacking, but I took one trip up to 10,000 feet, and just there was something, maybe because the mountains were high, we were closer to God, who lives in heaven, of course. But there was a reality there that was just there, that was entirely different than anything else I had known. Or in my own case, I was just born with it. I just knew. One of my earliest memories is escaping my hurt feelings when my mother scolded me by becoming very still and crawling inside myself, because I knew that there was a place inside of me where I always felt just fine, no matter what happened on the outside. And she'd hurt my feelings. I was naughty. It wasn't like she was bad. But still, it hurt my feelings when she scolded me. But I remember thinking of it. I knew that I retreated. If I retreated inside, I would find the place where everything was just fine. You know, we just know this, meditating in past lives, whatever it is. So we have this feeling of some kind of continuing reality. And with that comes this understanding that the more we can live, the more expanded the self-definition, the more expanded the reality that we live in, the more we have of what we're really looking for. And sometimes it comes to us dramatically, as it did for Viktor Frankl. When everything else was gone, he realized that the only thing that was really the source of everything was still with them. And they had, oddly enough, when all their freedom of choice was taken away, he realized that they still had complete freedom of choice, because the choice had always been what they decided internally. So, I mean, another way of putting this, quite simply, is we're here to learn. And people who have near-death experiences in return come back to say, we're here to learn, we're here to love. Sometimes they go back to college and get PhDs, but that's not really what we're here to learn. We're here to learn the nature of reality and the ability to make that choice for expansion, that choice for bliss, that choice for faith. And I don't mean blind faith, but faith in the pattern. I mean, I can easily say faith in God, but faith in God means lots of different things to different people. Faith in the fact that we have come from somewhere and we are going somewhere, and that somewhere is an ascending reality of ever greater experience. The search for greater awareness is also another way of putting it. Awareness is a very interesting word because it's a completely non-sectarian word. And if we really think about our lives, we realize that progress is always measured in terms of expanding awareness. I mean, even from just being little babies. The problem from when we're little babies is we don't even know these fingers belong to us. You know how children are and how they scare themselves with their own hands? Every time their hands flash in front of their faces, they get totally freaked out. Where did that come from? You know, what is that? Who's invading me? And there's this gradual realization that these hands belong to me and that I can control them. And they become more and more aware of everything. Yogananda writes in his autobiography of a yogi, his memories of an infant and hearing all these different languages in his memory from having lived before, and gradually figuring out that the consistent one at this time was Bengali, and that he needed to start tuning into the Bengali. He just becomes aware of where he is and who he's supposed to be and what kind of a body he's in this time. And if you watch children grow, it's growing awareness. How do I hold a fork? What do I do with the mashed potatoes when I have them on my fork? I'm supposed to put them in my mouth, but where is my mouth? You know? And so they they have to just gradually find all those things. 2, going to school, learning information, learning how to behave. And then when we become adults, we continue to expand our awareness. How do I relate to the people I work with? You know, how do I relate to the problem of earning money? How do I become aware of another person's reality sufficiently to be a life partner or a parent? And it's all just growing awareness. And if you reflect on the experiences of your life and experiences that were for you learning experiences, it can also be defined in expanding awareness, isn't it? You had something that you really wanted, and maybe you lost it. Maybe it was a job, maybe it was a relationship. If you were a beautiful young woman who was a model and then age takes you over and nobody wants you in the same way, you know, who am I? What's important to me? And your awareness expands. I thought I couldn't live unless I had this big house, I mean, as an example, and then I lose the big house, and I discover that there is a reality beyond the big house. I become more aware of myself in another context. And every time you can measure what you thought was the limit of your awareness, you'll realize that something pushed you to a greater level of awareness. Isn't that so? That's exactly what Viktor Frankl described. He thought he was defined by his intellectual work. It was ripped away from him. And he got to discover that there's another self-definition that includes that, but is also bigger than that. Strangely, paradoxically, the less materially it was defined, the more expansive it became. Because the awareness that is not dependent on external conditions is a more powerful state of freedom, you see. Because one is defined from the outside, and the other is completely defined from the inside. So once we get the idea that that's possible at all, we have the very interesting question, which is there any edge to that possibility? Is there any limit? Where is the limit? One of the things that happened to me prior to the time that I discovered self-realization, and especially met Swami Kriyananda, is I did a few things. I didn't do anything notable, but nothing lasted. You know, I sort of got into something like college, as an example, that was supposed to take me somewhere, and it just was over so fast, because it had an edge. And when I saw, as I described it, when I saw Swami Kriyananda and realized that his consciousness had no edge, and when I entered into relationship with him as my teacher and the life of Ananda as my path, I didn't know that 40 plus years later I'd still be completely immersed in it, because nothing else that I had touched had ever held me like that. But it just, every time I stepped forward in awareness, it receded. I grew up in El Paso, as I mentioned, until high school, and to get anywhere from El Paso, you have to go across all that empty desert. And I remember driving with my father riding in the back seat on those empty deserts, and there's that water mirage that you all are very familiar with here too. And I would always remember from the back seat as a child urging my father to drive just a little faster so we could catch the edge of that mirage. And he, of course, being a good daddy, would play the game with us, but we could never catch it, of course. And in a very real sense, I always remember that image when I think of the path of self-realization, of ever-expanding awareness. You think that this is what I'm going to achieve, but as soon as you start getting close to it, you realize that what you're involved with is infinite. Where is the limit of expanding my awareness? And when there's no limit, then it becomes, for me at least, just endlessly fascinating. And in a very simple explanation, all of us have exactly the same life lesson. And that life lesson is to discover the infinite power within us. The power to be free, the power to be blissful, the power to feel safe and secure, the power to give love, and all the details of our life, which we're so enamored of. We love the details of our life, don't we? We love astrologers, we love tarot card readings, we love psychics, we love past lives, we love to know where Jupiter is in our particular horoscope and where it is today. And we're fascinated by all these details, and they're not unhelpful. I mean, I myself have explored some of them, not a great deal of them, but a little bit of it, because every so often I would like a little external help. Does somebody tell me something that I don't know about what's going on here? But after a while, we begin to realize that actually every issue, whether it's about money or relationships or health or other people or anything, it's the same issue. It's something has happened that has persuaded me that now I'm justified in feeling bad. Now I have a right and a reason to be angry, to feel like a victim, to be sad, to distrust God, to realize that everybody but me is a jerk, whatever it might be. We've just got it worked out, and we have all the reasons, because not only did this person mistreat me now, but for 15 lifetimes that person has been mistreating me because so-and-so told me so, like this. We didn't ask that person what we did to that person in 15 lifetimes. I had one dream in my life that was a true past life. I have an intuition about some, but I had one dream, a very dramatic dream in which I was
I was a rebel in a certain kingdom, and the rule, and this is the truth. This was the dream. The ruling monarch was a cruel tyrant, and my husband and I led a revolution. This is really me. We led a revolution, but we were captured, and this cruel tyrant, he was killed. I mean, I dreamt all this. It was wild. I dreamt it all night long. It was unbelievable. However, at the end of the dream, I was a widow living in a convent, and I was very, very happy. And I just looked back on all of it as just what had to happen. But unfortunately, I shared this incarnation with that ruling monarch now, this lifetime. And so we didn't get along, as you can well imagine. We didn't get along very well. Somehow or another, that other person found out about this dream, although I never said a word to them. I told Swami, and Swami said, I'm inclined to think it's true. I mean, because it was just true. It was a true story. It fit. Everything fit. He said, I'm inclined to think it's true. Somehow the word got back to the other person. So that person wasn't able to conjure a dream, so they went to a past life reader and came up with the story of what I'd done, which we'd been rivals, and we'd been rivals together in some huge situation, and I just took their life. Just ruined their life. Completely ruined their life. Didn't kill them, but just completely ruined their life. And was happy to have done it. I mean, like, gee, no wonder they weren't fond of me when they had the chance. It's like nothing ever happens by accident. I mean, what do you think happens when somebody does something really, really terrible and seems to get away with it? Do you think it's just like, oh, wow, look at them. They got to die before it caught up with them. And then you see someone else and you think, oh, how unlucky they are. Wow, I wonder if there's a relationship here. It's a question of expanding awareness. So at that point, when both of us were completely armed with our, look what you did to me, Swami sat us both down and said, and his response was brilliant. He first just acknowledged that whether apocryphal or literal, the stories that we had both managed to conjure up were quite reasonable. They represented the energy. And I think they were factual also. But he said, it's not been revealed to you so that you can keep living in it. He said, look, both of you have changed. Neither of you would ever behave that way ever again. You learned. So past lives are not given to you to bind you in the present. They're to free you from the past. So you can say, oh, well, that explains it, so let me repudiate it now instead of going there. Expanding your awareness. As long as it has meaning, where am I supposed to go with it? We're not meant to be bound by it. It's like I'm bound by fear. I'm bound by hatred, which is to say lack of love. I'm bound by self-interest. I'm bound by self-justification. I'm bound by, oh, I was so deeply hurt that I have every reason in the world to be mad. How can I possibly be happy? Look what happened to me. That something has persuaded us that joy is not our true nature. And that God is not in charge and doesn't really know what he's doing, but needs us to straighten him out. Like this. So that's the only lesson there is. How we get there, however, that's where it gets subtle. But it really helps if we understand that there's basically, and I'm just going to put 2 words on this whiteboard here. That in any situation, we can either contract our consciousness into a smaller reality. Okay, you did something to me. I'm not going to think about what I might have done to you. I'm not going to think about the suffering that might have caused you to behave that way. I'm not going to even imagine that you have remorse. I'm going to contract my consciousness down to a self-definition that just includes my reality, and that's all I'm going to think about. Or we can expand our reality so that when something comes to us, instead of clinging more tightly to the smallest self-definition, to whatever extent we are able, we expand into a larger self-definition. Because starting back from where we were, everything that is progressive for us is always when we expand our awareness, isn't that so? And so where is the edge of that? And just these 2 different principles, whether we're responding by contraction or expansion. The nice thing about this too is If we're this tight and we just go to here, that's expansive. It's not like we have to go from here to here, because we generally, even to get from here to there, you have to go through all these stages, don't you? And actually, to get to here, this is what it looks like. So a great deal of the time, people become quite confused, and this is very subtle. They're always looking for shortcuts. You know, where we're actually standing is like this. We want to be on the other side of the room, looking open and relaxed. So, but we're not interested in this step. The step we want to make is to be over there. In other words, we want things to be different, but we don't really want to change. And that's one of the ways that we contract instead of expanding. We don't stand realistically in who we really are and what my next step really is. I joke this way: we'd much rather be the worst in the world. I mean, you know, if we can't be the best, we want to be the worst, because just being the true mediocre that we actually are is just too impossible to face. Few of us are the best, and most of us are not the worst. We're just hanging out in the middle. We're just part of the herd. And sometimes that's harder to take than anything. This is just the slogging. Every job has its dull side, no matter how glamorous the job. We recently, as you all know, finished a movie about Ananda, which I was on the movie set, and the actress is very beautiful who starred in that movie, and there was the makeup artist and the wardrobe, the whole scene, and you know, and the lights and the camera. But so much of movie making is just sitting there. And if you're all made up in your robe, you can't even eat. You have to sip through a straw. I mean, you're just like, it's a glamorous profession with this huge, just dull, mind-nullifyingly, stultifyingly dull component, while the grips carry all the stuff around, and you just wait for your 1 minute of... And life is a lot like that. There's just this process that we have to go through. Now, that's all very generalized, but instead of being specific, I think I'm going to stop and let you ask questions, and then see if we can make it more concrete with your thoughts. Does anyone have one?
Were your parents of any particular religion? I mean, I know you said you were Jewish, but were they practicing Jews?
No, we were what they call secular Jews. No, I wasn't raised. I was raised with a nice blank slate. No prejudice, no particular training. Judaism made me a little... Jews, after all, are the chosen people. So I had a certain quality of being one of the chosen people. But that actually has a very deep spiritual meaning, but it was never conveyed to me until I got into the self-realization path. But I knew nothing about Jesus, but I didn't have any prejudice. I was able to come to Christianity with a really clean slate. And so I was very well raised. I was raised to think for myself. I mean, we were intellectuals, and the advantage of Jews are that we were, especially, you know, I was born right after World War II, being slightly marginalized, much less so now, but 50 years ago, you do learn to rely on yourself. And so I feel that I got those qualities being raised Jewish. I think that's why I chose that family. Because I always, when I look back on it, I'm actually rather amazed. I trusted my own perception of things, I must almost say to a ridiculous degree. But I feel that my upbringing helped me that way. You know, you had to think for yourself, and you had to know what you thought. You had to stand strong in it, because there was always this slight sense that you could not rely on the world around you, especially in the 50s and 60s. So, but God was not part of it. He wasn't not part of it, but he wasn't part of it either. I asked my grandfather once, "Do you really believe all this?" Because he was a practicing Jew. He gave me such a funny answer, but it was such a typical answer. "Well, if I'm wrong after I die, I won't know it. And if I'm right, I'll be glad I did it." But even then I thought, what an answer. You know, like, that's not very persuasive. And when I asked my poor father once, when I was about 10, I said to my father, why wasn't Jesus the Messiah? I mean, some people think Jesus was the Messiah. Why don't we think he was the Messiah? My father, poor man, hemmed and hawed and tried to come up with an answer, and I was capable of perceiving that he didn't have the foggiest idea why Jesus wasn't the Messiah. And so I changed the subject. I didn't want to embarrass him any longer. So that was my religious education, pretty much. Any other thoughts or questions?
So then, has the Messiah come in the form of Christ consciousness for everyone now?
There's no for everyone now, because all souls are evolving according to their own personal rhythm. So the Christ consciousness is exactly the same possibility as it has been since the beginning of creation. And it's as equally available and equally hidden as it has always been. And individuals perceive entirely and only what they're capable of perceiving. The Jews have derailed themselves by repudiating not only Jesus, but the concept of an individual being able to realize God. It's in the mystical side of Judaism, but in mainstream Judaism, it just isn't there. You know, here's the Buddha. I'm not in our own temple, but the picture of any individual elevated into a position of divine consciousness is anathema to Jews. That's a graven image, and it's just unthinkable. And that's a profound and serious limitation in Judaism, because there's no option of self-realization, you see. An individual can't become self-realized. It's just not there. And Christians have boxed themselves into the same tiny spot, because the only person who can be self-realized in Christianity is Jesus. So both the Jews and the Christians are just wandering around without a direction right now.
What about the Kabbalah? Isn't that...
No, the Kabbalah, Judaism is a true religion, so there's fragments of it where you can still find.
Is it the oldest?
I don't actually know, because I never studied it, but there's fragments because it's in there. And of course there's true Christianity also, but the all-pervasive consciousness has been lost. I had a rabbi come to me for counseling because he felt that he couldn't find the heart of Judaism. And he just didn't know. He stopped being a rabbi because he couldn't find it. And I talked to him about this, about self-realization and what had been lost, and he understood it perfectly. But in the tradition of Judaism he was following, he couldn't go there. So his life lessons, he did not have a direction for his life. You see, once you understand that where you're going is towards self-realization, and that you can achieve it. This is in Christianity still. You know, be therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. That which I do, ye shall do, and greater things. These are not Jesus just being nice. Jesus was explaining to us, these are commandments. And when he said that, he was speaking of the fact that he had become self-realized. We can become self-realized. What we've lost in Christianity is the lost years of Jesus, is the piece where we understand that he set the example of discipleship and sadhana and self-realization. In Autobiography of a Yogi, the whole story of Autobiography of a Yogi is Yogananda's search for God, search for the Guru, training by the Guru, practice of spiritual practice, and the achievement of self-realization. Now, we understand that he was in fact a free soul when he was born, but when he incarnated, he played the part of a seeker because he wanted to show us how we're supposed to live. And that's exactly what Jesus did. The way Yogananda speaks of it, and this is in his writings, shortly after the last reference to Jesus in the Bible, when he was 13 years old or 12 years old and went to the temple in Jerusalem, separated himself from his parents, stayed back in the temple to teach. His parents realized he was not in the caravan leaving Jerusalem going back. After 3 days, they thought he was somewhere else. They rushed back to Jerusalem. They found him sitting calmly in the temple teaching. They were frantic. And they said, we were so worried about you. How could you do this? he looked at them completely bewildered as to their response. And he said, don't you know I have to be about my Father's business? I mean, this is what I was born to do. I wasn't born to be your son. I was born to do this work. Why are you even surprised? And then Yogananda says, shortly after that, Jesus left his family, and he went to India and he went to Tibet. And Yogananda goes even farther and says that the 3 wise men who came to see Jesus were masters from the Himalayas. In fact, he says that they were 3 of the masters who are part of the Ananda line of gurus now, Babaji, Lahiri, and Sri Yukteswar. And to quote Yogananda's words, I mean, how can I verify the truth of this, but Yogananda can say, he said that Jesus returned the visit. And for 18 years, the lost years in the Bible, he was in India. There's many traditions in India about this, that he was there, that he became a sadhaka, one who practiced sadhana. He found a master, he studied, he realized he got ready for his mission. Now, in the Bible, you hear about him teaching in the temple, and then boom, he pops up again when he's 30. Now, think about it. Like, nobody ever asked him, like, gee, where were you for those 18 years? You think he never mentioned it? It's like it doesn't even make any sense. And there are documents and traditions that at a certain point, those years were simply removed because they were wanting to make Jesus more and more different. This was the church. This wasn't the saints. But nobody had the nerve to create a new biography for him. And that's one of the ways you can tell it was removed, because it's a blank. How could it possibly have been a blank? The man lived for 33 years. How could his biographers never know anything about those years? They were just pulled out because they didn't want it to be, we didn't want him to have had to study. And once you did that, you see, no one knows how to attain self-realization. They don't understand anymore the only Son of God means the Christ consciousness. The only true expression of divinity in this world is the Christ consciousness. And they don't understand that Jesus showed us the way. I am the way, he said. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Well, follow me, walk with me, do what I did. But what did he do? He was just born the Son of God, and we're never going to be there, so we just have to hope that he'll help us. But what do you do? And the Jews, by repudiating Jesus, put themselves in exactly the same bind. So whenever virtue declines and vice takes a hold, the infinite takes visible form. That's how the Gita puts it. And a new master comes, and that's what Yogananda came to restore original Christianity. By restoring original Christianity, he's also restoring original Judaism, because Jesus was a Jew, and everyone who followed him was a Jew, and it was Judaism until the Jews repudiated it. So what Jesus taught was Judaism. So he just is bringing the whole thing back. And to go to our topic tonight, that's our life lesson. Our life lessons, we're here to be self-realized. And you can do that by being utterly devoted to Jesus. It's just that churchianity makes it harder, because they don't teach you how to get there. You can love Jesus and you can pray for his intercession, all of which is true. It's just big pieces of it are not in there. So Yogananda brought those pieces. Practice Kriya Yoga, serve, understand yourself as one with the infinite, expand your awareness, all of the teachings of yoga. This is what's coming back together. And we're all sort of beginning to get it, each in our own way. There's just like this growing understanding that I'm here for a reason, and my spiritual life is in my own hands. That's self-realization. That's why Yogananda called it that. And, we have Ananda, we have a path, we have a discipleship and so on. But what we really have, you see, is we have a way of life. And it doesn't have anything to do with the group. We band together as a group because at the present moment we're mighty few among the multitude. And it's a lot easier if you have kindred spirits who can help you. But there's nothing about the entity, whether it's this center or any of those centers. The entity is not what gives you salvation. What gives you salvation is your own expanding awareness. And you do those things which support your expanding awareness, And part of it is to come together and to work together and to create energy together. But it's your own expanding awareness. It's not the church's intercession, the priest's blessing, the certain ritual, nothing. In Autobiography of a Yogi, it says, rituals cannot free you from ignorance because rituals are not the opposite of ignorance. You understand? Nothing external is the opposite of your internal reality. The only opposite to that is self-realization, expanding awareness. I thought that if this happened to me, I would have to suffer. But now I realize that it was really for my own good, and even though it was painful, it increased my understanding, the search for meaning. And you become, from what happened to you, as Yogananda put it, it doesn't make any difference what happens to you. The only thing that matters is what you become through what happens to you. Because no event in this ephemeral universe is an end in itself. Among other things, you may have noticed that it all just keeps changing. I've tried to reassure people sometimes when this is happening to this, and I said, don't worry, something will happen. And I don't necessarily mean something good will happen, but something will happen. Something always happens. Nothing ever stays the same. So if you're having trouble coping with this, just wait, because something else will happen. And maybe it'll be so much worse that it'll just put this in the shadows. Maybe it'll be better. But something will always happen. Because that's just the nature of this world. It doesn't stay the same. It's a constant change. And whenever we get it in our minds that this is what it has to be, then Divine Mother, God, our own superconscious, our own desire for growth, just comes worming in there, takes it away from us. Whether it's adding something terrible or adding something good, it just never stays the same. And the more we're thinking that if I can just have this, and just have this, and just have this, and then just have this, and then just have this, and then have this, and this, then everything will be just fine. And we're sitting there holding it all, and and this woman told me, she was an odd lady anyway, but it was fun. She went to India. She went to India as a scholar to do some research. She was explaining how she ended up being on the spiritual path, and she was doing some kind of research in some ancient temple or something like that. And she said she would lie in bed at night and she would hear the mice eating her manuscripts. She just kept fighting against the mice who were always eating her manuscripts. And she just realized that there was something wrong with this picture, that somehow she was clinging to the wrong aspect of this, and she became a seeker instead of a scholar at that point. But I just love that picture. This was before the internet, so all she had was her papers, and she would hear the mice chewing on her manuscripts. I'm a practical person. I would have gotten a tin box, but she was not a practical person.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking about witness and being a witness and knowing that on one hand, I myself am an expression, right, of divine consciousness, right, through my soul, through how my soul's getting me to do whatever I'm doing. And good stuff, bad stuff can come, and I can just be a witness and say, oh, well, that's it, yeah, I can watch it. And so it's sort of, in a way, I'm not grasping the action part.
The part of what you're saying is a little too passive.
Yeah.
Because, as Swamiji put it, we don't become free of karma by doing it badly. We have to, the way we learn, life is a gymnasium. And if you can have a gym membership and you can go there every day, but if you don't use the equipment, it doesn't have any effect on you. And so too much of I'll just watch it is like going to the gym and watching everybody else exercise. My father came to visit Ananda once and wanted to watch the meditation. I said, okay, not much happens, but you can go in and watch it, So he went in and he watched it because he wanted to know what happened when people meditate. But that doesn't really have an effect. You have to, when your karma comes to you, you have to muster the energy to respond to it from the highest level that you can muster, because that's the exercise. If you just simply hold still, that's not, if you do nothing, you're contracting.
Because that's where Jesus put it. If someone strikes you on one cheek, you should offer to him the other. If he takes from you your coat, you should give him your cloak as well. What he's actually saying is, when karma comes to you, especially if it seems difficult, the natural tendency is to contract in front of it and wait till it blows over you. But what you actually have to do is you have to step into it and say, what does this have to teach me and how can I meet it? And how can I meet it is a very personal question about what is it that this is challenging in me and how do I meet that challenge? Sometimes it's challenging in us the ability to stand up and be strong and speak what we need to say and be forceful. Sometimes it's challenging in us our endless tendency to beat on the world, and what we need to do is we need to stand strong but still. But we always have to think about how we need to interact and respond.
So that's why it's helpful to have a teacher, because the more similar pattern, the less response, or the less different kind of response there is. It's blind.
It's very hard to know yourself. I was just reading in this little book, I don't know if we have it here now, it's a book by a collection of Yogananda's words. It's called How to Be Happy All the Time. And he talks in there about having the courage to present yourself to those who have greater awareness than you do and ask them, what do you see? And just, he talks about it. Actually, it was a very touching paragraph because he was setting the example for us. But he was talking about how very difficult that is, because it's very difficult to tell. Because it's always been like this for us, and we don't understand that it's arbitrary. I was 50 years old when I realized a fundamental aspect of my nature had been inculcated in me by my family, the way I was raised, and I never knew that there was another way to be. Mm-hmm. I was 50, and I had been on the path since my early 20s. I was stunned, and it made me extremely paranoid, like, what else am I wearing on my forehead that I don't even know? But it's just, you just have to keep at it. You want to know what's really true. You don't want to contract in self-protection. You want to expand into greater awareness. And so yes, you definitely, if you don't have a teacher, you at least need objective, compassionate friends whose wisdom you trust. And if you don't have someone in your life, you really need to seek someone in your life, because I could never have survived without my peers and my superiors. Like, what do you think? What how does it look to you? This is what I'm thinking. Am I completely loopy? Am I utterly out of my mind? And many times I have been. And then sometimes no. Sometimes my wise friends say, no, you've got the right handle on it. Just keep going. But it's very, very difficult alone. Yes.
There's something on the other side of the story that you're presenting, and waiting for you to speak about it. And what's the point of expanding awareness if you're not tapping into it? Uh-huh. In other words, Jesus didn't just preach, he also walked his talk.
Absolutely.
He did heal the sick.
Absolutely.
Raise the dead. And my sincere belief is what he was saying, I am the way, meaning you can do this as well.
Exactly.
I've shown you how to do it.
Exactly.
I've gave you the leadership that gives you the example they can do it as well as I can. Not go and teach, go and do. It wasn't contracting. There's reasons to do this, to contract and expand. It's the ebb and flow of life.
Right.
And to learn from that as you engage life and how you go with the flow.
Right.
And it's very healthy to be in the head and the heart to do these things. But he was tapping into a reality beyond the veil of his own heart, and miracles were happening.
Yeah,
and that is, he intentionally did that because he knew he could. Right. And that was what he was hoping to share with all of us.
And that's why he said, that which I do, ye shall do. If I haven't spoken on it, then I appreciate it. Absolutely.
But that veil is everywhere. for all of us.
Yeah. And that's
And
what
really, he just reached out and said, like when he healed the person that was blind,
Right.
he reached into the dirt,
Yeah.
put a little spittle in there, and did a little swirl,
Yeah.
and put it in the guy's eye sockets.
Right.
And the man saw.
Right.
What was he doing there? He was engaging
Right.
the creative force of the universe and the simple little ritual
It's just the way.
and grace, and embracing the grace of the moment at that point. It's so poetic.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous.
It's
It really
absolutely
is.
gorgeous, yeah.
It's so loving.
It goes way
But
past.
it
goes
was
way
so
past.
simple. It was like he was saying, a child can do this.
But see, now I'm gonna go back and try to tie it together because yeah, I love the way you said it. I agree with every word you said. Jesus had expanded beyond beyond most people's limited concept of the possible, limited concept of the power of God, limited concept of who I can be. He'd expanded beyond all of those realities, and he invited us to come with him. Yeah. He invited us to come with him. In fact, more than that, he commanded us to come with him. And Jesus was exactly what the Bible says he is, and there have been others like him, and we have the same destiny. We have the same inevitable destiny, and that's however you get there. You can get there by just single-pointed, absolute devotion to the Bible and every word that's there and everything that Jesus did, as long as you use it to expand your own sense of the possible, to be where he was and to do exactly what he did. Yes, and Jesus knew what the power was, and he used the spittle and the mud and all of that, but he knew that the whole universe can be commanded by attunement with the power that's there. And that's a very expanded point of view. And the thing about Jesus and self-realization is that he got there. I mean, this is the most amazing thing I find when I contemplate the life of Jesus. And this is right out of Yogananda's teachings. You don't find this exactly in the Bible, but when you put East and West together, this is when you find it. A self-realized master came through the same levels of ignorance and expanding understanding that all of us have walked through. There was a time when Jesus was in delusion, and then Jesus came to self-realization. And this is not how traditional Christianity speaks of it, but this is how the Eastern tradition speaks of it, because they have multiple masters coming over much, so they have to explain it. Christianity just has Jesus popping into the picture, nobody before, nobody after, so they don't have to explain it. But what that means is, when I'm standing here, somebody has done something, and I'm really angry at them, and I really want to take my revenge. It's not merely that Jesus, using his as an example, understands. He stood here at this level of consciousness, and he overcame it. Yogananda stood here, the Buddha stood here, Lord Krishna stood here, because they were and are an individual jiva, a unique divine expression, a single soul that gradually, through the practice, expanded their self-awareness until they expanded to infinity. And then out of compassion, they reincarnated with no karma. Jesus said no sin, but it's the same word, no karma, no unlearned lessons of their own. They just put on the mantle of a human being, walked through the same reality we walk through, and it's very hard to put your mind around it, how they can both be free and bound at the same time. But when I'm sitting here feeling, really upset about some idiotic delusion that has captured my mind and heart, I think, wow, Yogananda felt like this at some point. And he felt just like this. It's very startling when you realize that. And he got out of it. And it just gives you so much hope and makes these masters so companionable. Just really like, okay, you figured this out, so now you get me out of this. You were as attached as I presently feel to the people I love. You were as grief-stricken at the death of something or some person that was dear to me. You were as disappointed in your desires as I am now, so how did you get through it?
And that, that power, by the power of grace, it just comes in and he says, this is how. And so it's not just a romantic idea that you follow his footsteps. It's that you really do follow his footsteps. Been there, done that. That's how they did it. That's how they got out of it. Somehow that comforts me a lot. And here's another just odd picture. We tend to think of these individuals as archaic, back in ancient times, dealing with sheaves of wheat and sheep and things like that. But a message came to Swami Kriyananda from Babaji. Babaji is one of the gurus of this line, the deathless master in the Himalayas. It was a message, and I think it was a true message. It came through an intermediary. But the message was to Swamiji in India. At that time, he was running a daily television program, and he was doing a lot of recordings for the internet. The message from Babaji was that he was deeply pleased with the work that Swami Kriyananda was doing, especially on the work with the television. And the first thing I thought was, but Babaji lives in the Himalayas. What does he know about television? Just like the most naive thought. And I just realized, of course he knows about television. And it's like it's an eternal now. And there's been advanced and primitive civilizations. Jesus talked about sheaves of wheat because he was talking to the folks around him, and what they knew was, they knew wheat and sheep. I mean, now if your sheep fell into a ditch on the Sabbath, would you leave it in there? Well, gee, I don't know. I've actually never been close to a sheep. I don't know even how to get it out of the ditch. What would I do? And come to think of it, I don't have a Sabbath. I mean, it's like he wasn't trying to be esoteric. He was trying to be the opposite of esoteric.
Texas, you have to be careful because they'll pick it up and cook it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there you got it. Would you eat your sheep on the Sabbath? Yeah. So, but Yogananda talked about television, radio, movies, X-ray machines, because that's how he communicated to us.
So being a woman of the world and traveling so much, do you feel, the population is growing so big, do you feel like there's a lot of more self-awareness now, or are there just pockets?
Well, it's according to the masters, it's self-evidently a rising age. I mean, everything is different. And technology is moving so fast, and obviously consciousness is rising. We're at a transition zone. We're at the Kali Yuga, the form of the age of matter and form is past, but it's not disappeared. And what you're having is an absolute collision between those who believe in form and those who are beginning to embrace consciousness. And that's why the argument is between fundamental religionists and what they see as the disintegration of morality and spirituality. And they're right, because that rigid form, that separation, that our way is right, that you're of the devil and we're of the godly people, fight against between women and men, women must be suppressed, all of the things, because those people feel, and they're right, that their entire world is threatened. And it is threatened. And it's going to fight to the death. Yogananda said that it will get much worse. And, people are, at the same time that consciousness is really rising, it's also rigidifying. And you have these civil wars, like in Rwanda, where people who were neighbors, or in India a few years ago, people who've always lived together, suddenly differences are hugely important. And simultaneously you have this globalization. And Master just said it's a transition between a lower and a higher age, and it's not going to happen without conflict. And there's sort of like, there's a lot of demons loose on this planet right now. There's no only word for it. We're almost at the end of our time, but I'll tell you one more interesting story, and then we can stop. Swamiji said that there are 4 sets of people incarnated on the planet right now. This is fascinating, the way he put it. It strains people who have been part of these movements for many incarnations and are here now. He said the Atlanteans, the legend of Atlanta, which I believe was true, which was Atlantis was a very advanced civilization, but became so technologically oriented, and you'll hear pieces of this, became so dominate the natural forces rather than harmonize with the natural forces, and they began to to take advantage of the planet so much that in the end, the island of Atlantis sank. And it was those techno people who were egoically controlling rather than divinely harmonizing. We have a whole lot of them on our planet right now. And they're doing all the same thing. They're raping the earth, and they're making Mother Nature really upset. And as Swamiji said at one point, the earth is going to shake us off like fleas at some point here because we're violating natural law. I mean, we're violating ecological law, what to speak of more subtle laws in the way that we're relating to the planet. So those techno people are doing their thing. Then we have the Romans, who are the hedonists, the absolute anything for pleasure crowd. And Swami said they're in charge of all the entertainment industry. They're a whole lot of our politicians. And they're just in it for themselves. And they brought the Roman civilization down by breaking divine law, taking so much for themselves, thinking only in terms of what they could get. And and what you really see in our country right now is the Atlanteans and the Romans. And they're just running the story all over. Now, unknown to them, there are two kinds of Indians here also. There are the East Indians, people who are trained from the high traditions of India and Tibet for all those centuries of self-realization. And they're incarnated mostly in the West, actually. And we're all here, and we're very, very in tune with this other kind of way of living, this spirituality. And mixed in among us are also the Native American Indians, who are very in tune with the planet. These are, the Greenpeace people and all of the people who are really working hard to bring that understanding back. Some of them still look like American Indians and still behave like American Indians. They're the ones who have that. And the Romans and the Atlanteans don't know we're here. Mm-hmm. They really have no idea how powerful this thing is, this underground movement is, and they're going to blow the top off of it. They're going to blow it off with immorality, breaking of that kind of divine law. They're going to blow it off by violating the natural world. And after they blow it off, whether that's literally nuclear war, worldwide depression, these incredible storms, activating earthquakes, who knows? Master said it would be a terrible cataclysm. They'll blow it all to pieces, and then all of a sudden, this other civilization that we've actually been building here will suddenly be present and will move forward at that point. Isn't that, he said that in the early 70s. I've never forgotten it. I thought, wow. And I look around and I see it. One of my friends put it, I was in New Delhi when America, I don't remember which war it was. I think it was when we bombed Yugoslavia. One of my Indian friends said to me just the other day, we were sitting at the lunch table, "You Americans are always going to war." He said like that. And it was just and I realized just sitting there, oh my gosh, he's right. It just seems so preposterous to him, the way you Americans are always going to war. But I was in New Delhi, and Americans were bombing, I think in Yugoslavia, taking off from somewhere I don't have a very poor sense of geography. A friend of mine is involved in the airplane business. He works for the airport, and he's responsible for the safety of airplanes, and he often goes up in airplanes just to ensure their safety. He was in the air, and he was flying his routes with his planes up there, and the American bombers were taking off full of bombers here, dropping their bombs and going back. And he was watching them, just watching the American bombers full of bombs going and killing some people, then going back like this. We're sitting in this room. We were about 6 different nations, and we declared ourselves to be members of the nation of self-realization, and that they had their countries and we had ours. And it's just really the truth. It's like there's parallel realities going on right now. And I'm not even registered to vote, and I rarely vote because I can't really figure out among them who's the least terrible. And I don't believe in any of their solutions. So I actually feel that it's not responsible for me to vote because I'm just not engaged. But I think I'm more intensely politically active than almost anyone I know, because the problems of our world are the problems of consciousness. We could solve every problem we have in an instant, but nobody wants to, or not enough people want to. So by teaching people to meditate, to think in terms of expanding their awareness, to recognize that we are part of a greater reality, to appreciate what Jesus really taught, that's the solution. That's the solution to health care. That's the solution to fracking. That's the right word. That's the solution. You name it. Every one of them. It's a problem of consciousness. And so let's work on consciousness. We change that, we change everything. Yogananda said there will be before, but we have to be ready. We have to be ready to help, to deal with them. Even already, everybody's quite nervous, and increasingly so, and with good cause. You know, we can't rely on anything right now. We don't know where it's going. Like this. Every time I travel, I think, oh, will this be the day that the terrorists, blow up this plane or shoot out this airport? I mean, who would ever have thought like that? I went to Rome shortly after some massacre there, and I watched myself. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Look at those men holding machine guns. Wow, that makes me feel secure. Then I thought to myself, my God, I'm happy to see the man in the airport holding the machine gun. Whew! Things are really shifting. Yeah. But
Recently?
no, it was quite a few years ago. 10, 15, 20 years ago. There had been some big shootout in the Rome airport like the day before we were there. The Mumbai hotel that was taken over by terrorists, I've stayed there. I've stood in the windows and looked out at the place where they all landed. I was watching it, looking at, wow, I know that hotel. I could just as easily have been standing there. And it's just the world we live in now. So one more incentive. Love casts out fear, but not casual love. Not, oh, I wish everything were different love. Real power of Christ love. That's what it takes. Well, I've kept you a little longer than we promised, so thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to share with you.